My throat is a little off today as well. And I've tried to structure the class slightly better than yesterday. I think I'm going to be rebuilding Paytm from scratch in offline videos. I'll have probably six to eight offline videos where I'll cover, module 1, module 2, module 3, because it's a very big project, especially the way we're building it. What we'll try to do today is we'll try to implement some features given a base monorepo. So I've created a base monorepo which has authentication in there, recoil in there, a bunch of other modules in there that you can consider as a starting point. There are all the steps in slides, so you can also go through the steps and build it yourself. Where is it? projects.phoenixdevs.com. So if you follow steps from 1 to this 14th point and do all of these steps, you will reach this checkpoint repository, which will be our starting point for today. I'll try to take you through a little bit of how I created this checkpoint repository, but took me, let's say, close to an hour to build. Of course, there might be some step that I've missed here, forgot to mention you have to change the database URL, things like these. So at some point when you're building this, you might have to add something extra, but I've tried to document everything that I did to reach this starter repository. We'll be building from this starter repository today. The only thing we'll try to build will be something called on-ramping. This is useful for few cases. If you ever want to build a crypto exchange, then also you need on-ramping. If you want to build Zerodha, or a normal broker as well, then also you need on-ramping. On-ramping is a commonly used term / thing that you need if you want to build any financial app where you want to accept money from a bank. This becomes slightly easier if you're using something called Razorpay. If you've heard of Razorpay or Stripe, they make all of this very easy. So you don't necessarily have to, directly talk to the banks. A lot of times you won't get access to the banks as well, unless you're building a financial app, unless you're building Paytm, Zerodha, Razorpay itself, banks will not give you their APIs. If you're a small business like we are, app.phoenixdevs.com is, then you directly talk to Razorpay and Razorpay handles payments for you. But since Paytm is a big business, it is a financial app, even PhonePe is a financial app, Grow, Zerodha are financial apps. They can directly talk to banks. And what we're building today is something called on-ramping. Let's understand what on-ramping is. 1 second, share screen. Cool. I hope you guys can see my iPad. I'll give a brief of what on-ramping is and why is it very hard to build. So the way, before I start, for people who are joining for the first time, we're building Paytm. Yesterday's class was mildly interesting. We did a bunch of things, and the architecture that we're following is mentioned in this slide. I will redo this architecture later on, so I'll be taking you through what project we're building. For now, I just want you to learn, forgetting if we are building Paytm or whatever, what does on-ramping mean and how do you build it for your own financial application. So on-ramp, as the name suggests, ramping means that there is a very regulated entity like a bank, for example, HDFC Bank, and you just want to make sure audio is good. Yeah. And you want to build a financial app. What is a financial app? Could be Zerodha, could be Paytm, could be Razorpay. These are the three categories. Can't think of any fourth one. Maybe Slice, if you've heard of Slice. Slice and Paytm are sort of similar wallets. Whenever you're building an application like this, you are holding people's money for them. You tell people, okay, bro, this is my application, Zerodha. Please pay me via UPI, let's say 5,000 rupees. And now in your Zerodha balance, you can see rupees 5,000. You can trade with these 5,000 rupees. Zerodha is holding your money for you. That is one very dangerous thing to do, because if you don't have tech as sophisticated as a bank, you will lose money. If there's some bug and someone can put 50,000 over here and then send that 50,000 back to their bank, that's a security bug and highly unsafe. So when you're building a system like this, you need to be very careful. Okay, the numbers that you have in your database, because if you go to Zerodha and see rupees 5,000 here, it's effectively a number sitting in a database. You need to have solid security around this number, and whenever this number is going up or going down, you need to make sure it doesn't get manipulated by any external person. So that's why this is a hard problem to solve compared to any other standard Web2 problems we've solved. So the way this happens is, okay, whenever you go to Zerodha and you select, I will pay rupees 2000 via, let's say, net banking. Net banking is the easiest to understand, but even if the architecture makes similar-ish if you use a card, if you use UPI. But let's say you select net banking. What happens is Zerodha first tells HDFC Bank, let's say you selected HDFC net banking. Okay, bro, I mean, this architecture would be different. This is like how I would build it, how I think banks might build it, but this is not necessarily HDFC does it this way. You will tell HDFC, okay, bro, my user ID 1 is wanting to spend amount 2000. You tell HDFC, okay, I'm going to send you someone, please charge them 2000 rupees and let me know when you've charged them so that I can do a plus 2000 here on their wallet. Also, please send that 2000 rupees to my Zerodha bank account, which could be, in Kotak. It's not necessary that the accumulating bank account of Zerodha is in HDFC. It could be in Kotak, it could be in a different bank. So the first thing that Zerodha does when you select HDFC Bank is tells HDFC, okay, bro, I want to initiate a transaction for this user of my database, user ID 1 of my database, some user identifier of my database for this amount. And HDFC says, okay, here is a token, a random very long string, could be a hash, could be just a private thing, which you should send the user to when you are sending them to netbanking.hdfcbank.com. I repeat, HDFC says, okay, bro, please send this user to a website called netbanking.hdfc.com $token equal to this specific token that I have given you. When the user comes here, I will understand, HDFC Bank will understand, okay, this is that person that Harkirat had told me, I need to charge them 2000 rupees. So that these are the two things that, or maybe one thing that happens before you actually get redirected to netbanking.hdfcbank.com. And when you see the URL bar netbanking.hdfc.com, there's probably some token here that lets HDFC servers identify, okay, this is that specific request from Zerodha and I need to charge this person rupees 2000. Then you put your credentials, you simply talk to an HDFC server now. You are talking to an HDFC server, doing your payments, giving your password and OTP. And finally, when you click on submit, you have done the payment. Now HDFC knows that this person has approved 2000 rupees. This person has said, I'm ready to pay Zerodha 2000 rupees. So what does HDFC server do? HDFC server does a few things. Number one, it says, okay, we should minus 2000 from here. We should send 2000 rupees sabse pehle to Zerodha's bank account. This doesn't happen immediately. A lot of times this happens end of day. It's not necessary, if someone came to HDFC and said, I want to pay 2000, HDFC is immediately sending it to Zerodha. It might send them once every day, on some schedule. It's not necessary if 2000 got debited here, immediately it went to Zerodha. At some point, it will reach the Zerodha bank account. The second thing that HDFC Bank does is, it tells the Zerodha backend server, okay, bhai, the payment was done on our side. We have taken 2000 rupees from user with ID 1 and we will send it to you eventually. Please, do a plus 2000 on your wallet so that the user has paid. Give them the service that you asked them to pay for, which in case of Zerodha is plus 2000 rupees here. That is the general architecture. This final thing that you call over here is what's called a webhook. Okay, by Zerodha has a webhook or an API endpoint, internal.zerodha.com/HDFC that HDFC can send a request to tell Zerodha, Kiblo ID 1 has paid rupees 2000. Please add them to your balance. This is what's called a webhook. And that's how financial services talk to banks. Was this easy enough, or should I go into a little more detail? Are we good to go? We are not good to go. Any specific questions in this specific part? Let's see, repeat. Let's start from the top. Let's see a more actionable example here. I go to makemytrip.com. Assume MakeMyTrip is a wallet. I repeat, Assume this is not a travel website, it's a wallet. And in this wallet, I say I want to buy for 3,000 rupees. Let's do a hotel instead. Book this now. When I go to whatever this final banking page, assume this is the Zerodha banking page where I have to pay 10,000 rupees to Zerodha. So what will I do? I will select net banking. I will select HDFC Bank. I will click on pay now. What happens when I click on pay now? When I click on pay now, number one, when I click on pay now, this is the website which has the pay now button. As soon as I click on this, number one, a request goes to Make My Trip server or Zerodha server, whatever you want to call it, whatever the current front end is. And Make My Trip server says, okay, I want to charge 10,000 rupees to this user. Now Make My Trip doesn't have access to this user's HDFC Bank. Make My Trip just knows that this person wants to pay via HDFC. So while this request is hung over here, or when it's processing the request, it tells HDFC Bank servers, okay, hey, I have a user with ID 1, my ID, Make My Trip ID, not the net banking ID. He doesn't even know what the net banking ID of the user is. I have a user with ID 1 who wants to pay 10,000 rupees via HDFC. Please give me a URL where I can send them. Let's make it even easier. And then HDFC says, okay, send them to netbanking.hdfc.com/token equal to something. HDFC says, whoever you want to charge 10,000 rupees, send them here. You send the same thing to the front end and you redirect the user to netbanking.hdfc.com. So when I click on this button, two things happen. Number one, a request goes out to Make My Trip, which sends the request to HDFC Bank, which responds back a redirect URL. And then you redirect here. Now Make My Trip uses Razorpay or whatever, probably a payment provider. So, these steps won't be the same, but assume you are building Paytm, you're directly connected to banks. And as you can see, finally, a request reached here. Now there is no, token over here. So how did the token get passed, Harkirat? Probably, I'm not sure. You can also pass in requests extra data to a website when you're visiting it via some hidden parameters. That's probably what happens here. Now I'm a little intrigued to check what that is. But, this is not something like $token equal to 123. But somewhere HDFC Bank knows, this request is of Harkirat, who I need to debit 2,000 rupees. That is exactly why if I put my credentials, it will show me 10,000 rupees need to be debited. I will click on a button, approve the request. Once I approve the request, what will happen? How will Make My Trip know Harkirat has paid? All of these interactions are happening with the HDFC Bank server. So how will Harkirat know, how will Make My Trip know Harkirat has actually paid? The HDFC server, this is the website that you're on, the netbanking.hdfc.com. If this is the website that you're on, when you go through all the steps and finally pay, the HDFC server will tell the Zerodha server, this ID 1 that you sent me has paid rupees 2,000. Please give them the service that they asked for. Please credit their wallet balance or do something else. Give them the tickets, so on and so forth. So the HDFC server directly talks to the Zerodha server. The HDFC server directly talks to the Zerodha server. What does not happen is, you go through these steps, let's say, and you get redirected back to makemytrip.com. And then yahan se a request doesn't go to the Make My Trip backend server. I repeat, what does not happen is, what you might think happens, but does not happen is, user is on net banking page. And when they succeed with the net banking payment, they don't get redirected to first the Make My Trip front end. And then the front end doesn't tell the backend, the payment has been done. When they're on this page, the HDFC server directly tells the backend, कि हाँ payment has been done. HDFC server talks to this backend. Make my trip front end doesn't talk to this backend, because if make my trip front end talk to the backend, that means the user can always send this request, a modified request, कि भाई I paid rupees 1 lakh or something like that to the server, and then the backend will be like okay. तो ये समझ आया क्या? I think still might be a little confusing, but let's see. Let me do a poll one more time and see, do we understand how services talk to banks? Okay, 85%. Good, not great. But okay, let's take. If you don't understand this, I will recover this in the offline video. But either way, let's proceed then. And this architecture that I've shared is very similar to the architecture that you follow if you ever integrate Razorpay.com or Stripe.com. Then also, because effectively Razorpay and Stripe are like banks, right? You send the user here for a payment, and then Razorpay tells you the payment is done, and same for Stripe. So if you ever integrate payment onto your website using this, the architecture remains sort of very similar. Cool. Given that information of what we are trying to build, let's first go through let's spend at least the next 40 minutes, which means the first part of the class, understanding the Paytm project starter monorepo, this monorepo that I've built, which has a bunch of things. It has two applications, a merchant application and a user application, and it has a bunch of packages. UI, which has all your components, store, which has your recoil stuff, DB, which has your Prisma stuff. So how did I build this specific module, which is a good starting point to, actually start to write our code. Let's go through that next. So I would urge you to clone this locally. Let me paste it in chat. Just clone this repository and try to follow some steps with me to, run it locally. If you miss a step, it'll be a little hard. So try to, if you want to, code with me, just clone it locally and let's go together. All right. After we set up the project locally, then I will share how I wrote the project and the architecture of what we're eventually building. All right. Never felt like banks would be this difficult to teach, but this will be very easy for you to understand if you ever build any application that accepts money. Even if you build a course selling website where you are eventually accepting money, you will follow a similar architecture of Razorpay bank or Razorpay APIs talking to your APIs via webhooks. But okay, we will discuss this more. Let's clone the project. All right, I'll wait for a minute to just clone. If you've already cloned, then just run npm install so that you get all the dependencies locally. Still wait for 40 more seconds, then we will proceed. Feel free to explore the code base until then. Look at Q&A as well. Why do you stop using Vim? Very hard to use during classes, and then muscle memory kicked in VS Code. Oh, so it will avoid a security breach. Like if you can't replicate requests by looking at network, tab and do it in Postman. Exactly. And also, you don't, that is true. You can't replicate the request and redo it in Postman. And also yeah, that's the best explanation. I mean, you can't replicate the request and do it in Postman. That's the best. Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it. Number visible, sir, MMT pay. Yeah, I will do it. How would you Sensible work in this way? What's Sensible? Is it an exchange? Feels like it was a broker back in the day. Happy to discuss at the end of the class. Would you please share the access to offline videos to 1 to 100 people? Which offline videos? Can someone hack webhook server and send ad? Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. Someone asked, okay, Harkirat, you said, that is a good question. You said this is Zerodha's backend, and this is HDFC backend, and HDFC backend will talk to the Zerodha backend or call an API like internal.zerodha.com and send some details ke bhai user ID 1 has credited or sent rupees 2000. Then why can't I randomly send this request? Anyone can send this request to the Zerodha server and keep crediting. That is true. But whenever this request is sent, HDFC Bank also sends a password that is shared between these guys. Whenever you set up a webhook in HDFC Bank, it will share a password. Whenever you check these arguments, you also check the third password that came in, is it the same password that HDFC has? And that way, even if more people send you requests, you can always filter these out. Only legit requests from HDFC Bank will come in. This is generally true for webhooks. Whenever you're writing a webhook, since it's exposed over the internet, whoever is calling that webhook, you need to share a password with them so that you're able to validate that the request is actually coming from them. Then you can also do IP-based blocking. If you know net banking.hdfc bank is only in a certain IP, you only allow those IPs. But generally, a password is good enough to solve this problem. All right, guys. Given you have this repository and there is no readme.md that explains all the steps to follow, what do you think the first step would be if you want to start this locally? Harkirat, if it had a Docker file, then all I would have had to do was docker-compose up. That is true. But this does not have a Docker file. Harkirat, then number one thing I have to do is get a database because this project probably uses some sort of a database. In fact, if I go to packages.db/schema.prisma, I see it uses PostgreSQL. And if I look at the .env file in packages/db, Prisma .env, there is no .env. Well, we can add a .env, but you get the idea. We need to start a Postgres database. You can either start it locally or you can get one from NeonDB. So that's the first thing you have to do. I'm going to start it locally using Docker, but you can quickly get one from either neon.tech or from console.avian.io. Both of them will give you a free database to start your application. If you want to start it locally, what is the command to run? If you remember, docker run /-e the Postgres password in detached mode with this port mapping, and then the image that you're running, that is Postgres. So however you want to start your Postgres database, please do it. I'm going to do it locally like this. Do we need pooled connections? We don't need pooled connections right now. We only have a single server, so it's fine. Run it. And I have my database running locally. For those of you who got it from neon.tech, you should see a database that you might have created. For example, I have many over here. Whatever is your database, just copy this string from here. Make sure the password is visible. Click on the I and then copy the whole thing with the password. And then paste it where? In packages/db/.env. I repeat, in packages/db, create a .env file, an environment variable file, where you add this database underscore URL equal to whatever your database URL is. In my case, it is not this. In your case, it might be this. In my case, it is PostgreSQL : Postgres : my password @localhost/Postgres. If you start it locally using Docker, this is your connection string for it. I think I'm missing one thing here, :5432. If you start it locally, this is your connection string. If you start it somewhere else, then this is your connection string. Given that you have the database URL, what do you think is the next step? It is actually migrating the database. Since this is a Postgres database, you need to update the schema of the DB and make sure all the tables are present here. So what command should you run? Can you guess? If this code was written very well, there would have been a global command that you could have run, npm run db : migrate. But since this code isn't written very well, how would you from first principles migrate this database? You would go to packages/db and run a specific command. Do you remember what that command is? npx prisma migrate dev. npx prisma migrate dev. And if you run this command, and if your database URL is right, it will say applied migrations. If your database URL is not right, if you've messed up this, or if you have already used your database in the past, it will ask you, should I delete your database? Make sure you don't have any sensitive data in your existing database, then feel free to delete it. If you have some data in there you want to preserve, then get a fresh database if this command asks you to delete your database. So it might ask you to delete your database. If you have existing data there, please be sure whether or not you want to delete it. Either way, when you migrate the database, now your database has a specific schema. I'm going to show my database's schema. As long as this command succeeded for you, your schema will be the same. The way to see it locally, if you have database running via Docker, you can run the command docker exec -it, the ID of the container that is running Postgres /bin/bash. This is the command we discussed a few times when we were doing Docker as to how you can get into a container. And then here, if I run psql-u Postgres, it will let me run a bunch of Postgres commands. The one that I'm going to run is /dt, which shows me my tables. And it says, Harkeerat, you have 3 tables, a merchant table, a user table. Ignore the third one. So my database has migrated. If you want to check the same thing on your side, you can also go, if you're using NeonDB, there should be an SQL editor somewhere. This SQL editor. You can run a command over here, select star from users, and it will show you, okay, you have a users table. So feel free to try it out, but as long as your migrate command worked, you should be fine. What was the command I ran? npx prisma migrate dev. Given that my database has migrated, let me first do a quick poll and make sure at least 80% are good to go, and then we will proceed. Again, I will 99%, recap all of this, start from scratch and do the Paytm project, in very nice modules. Okay, but most people are good. Well, any specific place where people are stuck? Q&A. Yeah. How do you get terminal? Can't reach the database server. Your port looks wrong, 5432, but yeah, your database Docker command, please. So yeah, just get one from NeonDB, right? But the Docker command was docker run. I'm going to paste it if you want to run it locally. This was the command that I ran. But yeah, if not, I'll wait for 30 more seconds and then we'll proceed. And if someone wants to do something extra, feel free to go on to the next step. Well, there is no next step. This is good enough. After this, we should be able to run the application locally. So I'll wait for 30 more seconds, then we'll proceed. $15 more seconds. All right. Cool. The next step after you have migrated your database, after you've run the command, is generating the Prisma client. So the command is npx prisma generate. That should hopefully, if your database is right, generate the @prisma/client, which you can now use throughout your application. If you did this much, you're probably good to go unless I'm missing some step. What were the 2 things we did? npx prisma migrate followed by npx prisma migrate dev followed by npx prisma generate in the db folder. Now go to, make sure you have run npm install globally once. in case you did not. If you did already, it's fine. Then go to one of these apps. You don't even have to go to any of these apps. Just run npm run dev. When you run npm run dev, it should start two applications for you. One on localhost colon 3000, one on localhost colon 3001. Try to open both of them and see if you see something at least. In my case, I see hi there 0 in the first application. I see a app bar that says Paytm and login in the second window. Hopefully you see something similar. But I'll wait for 10 seconds for people to run npm install followed by npm run dev. This is starting both of our applications. A merchant application that people like Swiggy will use, or your dukandar, your shopkeeper will use whenever they're accepting payments via Paytm. The user app, which is the core Paytm application that end users use. The basic checkpoint looks something like this. The user app has a nice app bar and that's it, nothing else. If you click on login, it takes you to a login page. You can put a phone number and a password and try signing in. And I get an error. We'll have to debug that. And if you go to the same on localhost colon 3000, so localhost colon 3000 /API/auth/sign-in, you should see a sign in with Google, because the architecture that we thought of yesterday mentioned that bhai, the merchants will be allowed to log in with Google and the clients, the users of Paytm will be allowed to log in with phone number. That's why we choose this. There is a bug right now that is causing this, but we will see what that is. So should be easy to fix, I'm assuming. Try signing in. Does anyone already know what's up? I'm assuming you all are seeing the same thing. If that is the case, Google Client ID, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, merchant app does not have a .env file. User app also does not have a .env file. That is why none of the logins are working. If you actually followed all the steps I mentioned in projects.100xdevs.com to build this, at some point I introduced, adding, let me quickly show you, adding these .env files in the 11th slide. You need to add this .env file. If you go to the 11th slide, you need to add this .env file in the, which one of this will be the Paytm app, so the user app. So if you go to the user app, add these two secrets to your .env file. User app /.env. Should have JWT secret and next auth URL. That's why it was not able to redirect. Makes sense. And similarly, merchant app, since that requires a login with Google, over there the .env file will have these two things and a Google client ID and Google client secret. Where to get these from is a whole different story we have already covered in next auth. So I'll skip this. Anyways, we are only building the user app today. So let's completely ignore the merchant application for now. I just wanted to show, okay, we have two front ends, but ignore this for now. Let's just focus on the user application, and over there, add these two to the .env file. That's the only other thing I did. Both of them are used by NextAuth. If you have gone through the NextAuth application, you would have sort of known what they do. But this is the redirect URL. This is the JWT secret that you use to sign the JWT. It's used over here, as you can see. All right. Assuming you did this as well, can you try to rerun npm run dev? You can just go to apps/user app and run npm run dev, because we'll just be working with the user app today. We will not be working with the merchant application. So just go to apps/user-app and now try going to localhost colon 3000. N1, sorry, not 3000, 3001. Now try logging in via Paytm. Still some error. We will debug together, no worries. Maybe it works for some of you, I don't know. But for me, it did not work. Let me try that one more time. Sign in with credentials, click on it. Did work the second time. I don't know why it didn't work the first time. I don't know for how many of you it works, but for me, I see Paytm, I see logout, which means it seems like I'm logged in. I'll do a poll very quickly and see for how many of you it works. But that's the basic authentication we have. Harkirat, did this user reach the database as well? If I go here, put a username, put a password, does this user reach the database? It should. That logic is also already written. We'll be going through all of that logic very soon. But if I quickly show you my users table, sorry. You will see I have two entries, one with this phone number, one with this phone number, and I have hashed the passwords over here. I don't have the raw password stored in the database. So there are a few things that happen that make authentication sort of good over here. Now we will discuss how all of this has been bootstrapped before we actually proceed to writing some code. But before that, I'll do a quick poll to make sure everything is working for people. To recap, step number 1 was cloning the repo. Step number 2 was running npm install in the root folder. 3 was doing a cd packages/db. Step number 4 was adding a .env file with the database URL. Also getting a database from neon.tech/docker. Step number 5 was npx prisma migrate dev to migrate this specific database. Step number 6 was npx prisma generate to generate the client. Number 7 was add .env file to user-app or app/user-app. And then step number 8 was npm run dev to run the project locally. And now you're able to put people's actual username and passwords into this database over here. Is this much clear? Are we good to go? %. Good, not great, but still pretty good. Let's take I'll do another poll. Based on that, we'll decide whether or not we have to do a small break. But after that, I'll be taking you through authentication, specifically things like how are passwords hashed. We have never discussed that before. Small things like that before we proceed. Do you want a break? Yes or no? Do you want a break? Yes or no? Pretty close competition, but yes wins. So we'll take a very small break. 7 minutes. We will meet back at 7:50. I'm looking at Q&A until then. Paste the steps in chat. Let me paste them in chat. Done. And command to check for DB tables. So after you've done a docker exec followed by PSQL /DT semicolon will show you all these things. What was the command to fetch the PSQL users data? It was select star from users or user, sorry, capital U, USER. This decentralized file calculators should dekh lo, please. Okay, let me see. EVM based, this is Solana. Can you paste the commands? Sure. Docker exec. Now docker exec means you have to replace this with your own container ID. Let me do that. Your container ID. How will you get your container ID? Let me paste this in chat. Sorry. You'll get it by running docker ps. And then, yeah, those are the two steps. How do banks identify that the ID belongs to which user in bank database? They just redirect you to a front end, and then You reach that front end, netbanking.hdfcbank.com. You put your credentials here. That is why you know, okay, the user ID 1 on Make My Trip is being paid by Harkirat, whose customer ID is this. So when you reach the net banking page, you put your credentials, right? You put your username and password. That is how they know, okay, this is Harkirat, who is paying for a Make My Trip transaction that Make My Trip told me about a few seconds ago. Error, can you paste the error on localhost 3000 after login? Did you update the .env file in apps/user app to be, to have these two? Middleware in Next.js will come this week. Middleware and client side, server side rendering, client side rendering, and static side generation will come this week. Generation, middlewares, CSR, SSR, SSG. All right. The store recoil error is still coming. Is there any solution for it? Someone posted the solution, but I haven't looked at it in the beginning of the class. End of class, let's do the merchant setup quick run. So the merchant setup quick run. We can do whatever you want at the end of the class. We'll try to finish by 8:30, 8:45ish. Then we can do whatever we want. 4 more minutes, then we'll start, guys. When are we doing merch? Answer that. Have you heard about Internet Computer? I have. A few friends are building something. They're the biggest company on ICP. I forgot the name. Friends.chat, friends.fun. ऐसा कुछ सुना रहे हो. When are you going? Okay, so that simply do npx Prisma Studio. If you are, okay, of course. What an idiot am I? You can just go to packages /db and run npx Prisma Studio. Why did I not do this? And you can look at your merchants table, your users table, and explore. These two users were added. Gives you a very nice GUI to explore everything. What is the command? npx Prisma Studio. I'm surprised I probably did not even introduce this. But yeah. After login error localhost 3001. Akash, can you show me the exact error by pasting it in a Notion doc? Can you show me the requests that are going out? Can I run 2 Prisma DBs? Yeah, you can. Yeah, but you shouldn't. I mean, if you're thinking in this case, I need 2 databases, you don't. You don't need a merchant database and a user database. A single would suffice. You can have 2 databases if you have applications that don't need to access each other's data, or there is no joins, because cross database joins are very difficult. Still achievable but difficult. So you usually just have a single database where you put everything. 3 more minutes, then we'll start. Are we doing? Answer that. Can you tell again? I don't have database from any BU. Then you use Docker. How to get the database? Is that because of Docker? Oh, yeah. So there's a video called Actionable Docker where we discuss how can you start Postgres locally. That is what I did, but you don't have to run it locally. You can always go to neon.tech, sign up over here, and then click on new project, click on create project here, and it will take you to a page like this. And this will be your database credentials. It will start a small database for you, so you don't have to start it yourself. Can I run 2? So that don't run npm run build. And if you're running dev, and if you're facing errors, run npm run dev in apps/user app. So run npm run dev here. Don't run it in the root folder. Daily code isn't working. App. Yeah, because this Vercel app is not working because we moved off of Vercel, and this got indexed very heavily on Google. But this is the new URL now, projects.nextsteps.com. 2 more minutes. Have you answered that? In the last wallet app, I use this logic to store money without decimals. Please review. Let me do this after the class. Let's do this after the class. Akash. Q&A. 1 more minute and then we'll proceed. Is a webhook always polling the other API? How does our webhook keep listening to the other API? What is a webhook? It is a server. It is an HTTP server. A server you have deployed somewhere. It is listening forever. That is true for api.facebook.com as well, right? This server is always up and running somewhere. Every backend server is perpetually running, right? Of course, unless there's a crash, something went down, it's up and running. So a webhook is nothing special. It's another backend server that is running. Only you've given some credentials to netbanking.hdfcbank.com. Okay, bhai, please hit this specific server from time to time whenever you get a payment from one of my users. All right, 750. Let's start. Let's proceed to going through how I built authentication here. The thing that you will learn is how you can do hashing in passwords. How, if you look at the current passwords, packages /db, and if I run npx Prisma Studio, you will see the users that are put in the database, their password looks something like this. It's a very hashed password. It's not 123123, which is what I actually put in the input box. So how does this password hashing happen? And the answer is using a library called bcrypt. Let's go to, maybe before I deep dive into anything, let me take you through the folder structure really quickly. Let's ignore the merchant app completely. Let's focus only on the user app. Here, you will notice I have a app/page.tsx at the top, which renders my app bar over here. This app bar is how you see something over, here. If I go to localhost :3001, you see an app bar at the top, provided I'm running the applications. Let me quickly run it. apps/user app npm run dev. You see an app bar at the top, this app bar, which has a login button or logout button and Paytm written over here. This is the code for that specific page. Question is, what happens when I click on this login page? The request goes to /API/auth/signin. Who is the handler for /API/auth/signin? Let's open the folder structure. User app /API, user app/API/auth/any endpoint is caught by this route.ts. If you have done next auth, then this is straightforward. If you have not done next auth, then it will be a little weird to understand this syntax .. next auth. Basically means any request that's coming to /API/auth/anything /API/auth/anything, doesn't matter, will be caught by this route.ts. And if you look at this route.ts, it says I'm going to import next auth from next-auth. I'm going to import some options from this auth options file, and then I will create a handler called next auth with these auth options, and then I'll export a get and a post handler that will handle this. If this syntax looks very weird, especially this line, you should go to the next auth video. But high level, this is the same as export function get, or export get equal to handler and post equal to handler. So that and this mean the same thing. It means that bhai, any get or post request that's coming here is not being handled by this function, but being handled by this handler right here. If you know Next.js, this is straightforward. If you've not done next auth, then this will be a little confusing. Oh boy, my throat. But let's look at the auth options. The configuration that we're sending. Again, if you've done next auth, this is pretty straightforward. Okay, since we are only supporting username and password right now, we use a credentials provider, which has a phone number and password as the two keys that we want the user to pass in. Phone number, password. If you remember the credentials provider from the next auth class, you can clearly describe that bhai, our inputs will be either email and password, or it might be, email, phone and password, three things. Or it could just be a single, if I write admin token over here, then it could just be a single thing as well. If I refresh, the front end refreshes as well. If I change the credentials to just be a single admin token, okay, by whoever has this admin token, allow them to log in, then that is what the front end will show as well. This page is auto generated by NextAuth based on what credentials you tell it to support. But in our case, since we have a Paytm application, phone number and password are the two good inputs for us. And lastly, name it credentials. Whatever you write over here as the name is what appears over here. If I write sign in with phone number, then what appears here is sign in with phone number. That is the significance of name. The significance of credentials is what all inputs do you want. And the last thing, not the last thing, there are a few other things afterwards, but authorize is the most important thing. Authorize is the function that gets called anytime you click on submit. Anytime you click on submit, your username and password that you've put here reach this credentials argument. So credentials.password is the password that you put in. Credentials.phone is the phone number that you put in. And the request reaches here. Here is where the meat of the logic is, that signs up the user, or if the user is already signed up, then signs in the user, make sure that their password is correct. And then if it is correct, tells next auth you're good to go. This user's credentials are right. And if it is wrong, tells next auth this user's credentials are wrong. That is what all of this logic needs to do. Let's look at what it does. The first thing it does is const hash password equal to await bcrypt dot hash credentials dot password 10. I don't even know what the significance of this is. But this bcrypt dot hash function, if you look at the bcrypt library at the top, lets you convert this password the user sent into a hash so that whoever are the developers of this specific library, they're not able to, look in the database and figure out that Harkirat's password is I love Neha. So to prevent you putting plain text passwords here, you hash them so that they finally look something like this. And none of the developers can look at it and be like, the password was I love Neha. Very basic security thing you should always do. There are also some countries where this is a breach of law if you're storing, user's password in plain text. So you should never store the user's password in plain text. You should hash them in a way. Okay, given this hash, you can never get back to the original string. Given this hash, you can never understand the original password was I love Neha. Okay, Harkirat, you hashed the password. Given the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 simple password, you converted a weird string out of that and stored that in the database. Let's see what the next line is. It checks, does this user already exist? Has this user signed up in the past or signed in the past? db.user.find first. Where does db come from? It comes from @repo/db/client, which is the Prisma package that we had created yesterday. If we go to packages/db, you will see it has all your Prisma logic. If you open index.ts here, you will see it exports Prisma. In a way, we had done Prisma in Next.js. So if you have not gone through the Next.js plus Prisma class, this might feel very, very complicated. But if you have, then you might remember, okay, we followed a blog post. We followed Prisma with Next.js. This blog post, not this one. This one, best practices for installing Prisma client with Next.js, to arrive at a solution like this. We export this from here and we're importing it over here. And then we say, if the user does exist, then to check whether or not their password is correct. What should you do? You should check const password validation equal to await bcrypt.compare credentials.password and existing user.password. What is existing user.password? It is this password that came from the database over here in the existing user value. We get the user who has that specific number. Let's say this number is the user that's trying to sign in this variable. So existing user will become, you get the idea, like it will have username and password that will come from the database, and the password will be hashed. So the password will look something like this. You can't simply be like, okay, bhai, const password validation equal to credentials.password equal to existing user.password, because this password is hashed, this password is raw. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the very long hashed string right here. So you first have to convert this into a hash again. You have to convert this into a hash again, and then compare the hash that you generated from this guy with the hash that is in the database. I repeat, given the original string that the user sent, 123456, convert this 123456 into a hash again, into a randomly generated string again, something like this, and then compare this string with the string that is present in the database, because the thing that's present in the database is already hashed. The way to do that is this. Harkirat, why can I simply not do const password validation equal to hashed password equal to existing user dot password? Why have you done a bcrypt dot compare? Why can't I just compare the hashed passwords? And the answer is bcrypt dot hash will always give you a new hash. It's not necessary that if you hash 123456, the output that you get is the same. Could be different outputs. So bcrypt gives you the bcrypt dot compare function to compare two hashes, and it tells you whether or not they are the same. That is why we have to do this rather than comparing the hashes raw. We cannot compare this hash password directly to the thing that came from the database. That is what this line does. If the password relation is right, then you can tell nextauth कि भाई the user with this ID and name and email has logged in, and nextauth will take care of setting the cookies. If that is not the case, then you return null, which means you tell nextauth कि भाई the password was incorrect. Don't let the user log in. Let's see this in action. Let's put a bunch of logs here. Let's put console.log. You don't have to put it, or if you want, feel free to. Credentials password from DB is credentials.password. No, sorry, existing user.password. Raw password from user is credentials.password. Hashed password from user is hashed password. Let me log all three of these things, and let me try to log in once. I will run npm run dev. I will open localhost 3001 / API auth sign in, and let me put a random 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. That is my phone number, and 1 2 3 1 2 3 is my password. If I click on sign in with password, you will see nothing gets logged. Can you guess why? Why did nothing got logged? Because this logging that I added only exists if the user already exists. This user with this phone number was not in my database. Now they are. So now if I re-log in with the same users, so if I go to 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10, and what was, let me put a wrong password. This is a wrong password. If I click on sign in with phone number, if you look at the logs, firstly it says sign in failed. So if I put the wrong password, sign in fails. If you look at the logs, it says password from database was this hashed password. The raw password from the user was this thing, and the hashed password from this thing that the user sent you was this. This and this were compared, and since the original passwords that these were created were not the same, the hash comparison failed. If I send the right password, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10, and 1 2 3 1 2 3, then number one, you will notice I was able to log in, and number two, you will notice this hash, even though these hashes are different, one from the database and the one that just got created from this, bcrypt.compare returned a true. It was able to compare that the original thing from which these two were created is the same. That is how you do password validation the right way. What was the wrong way? Storing the passwords natively in the database. Never should you store 1 2 3 or I love Neha directly in the user base. All right, cool. Hopefully that's clear, but let me do a quick poll before I proceed, because the next thing is things from here are slightly easy before we move to writing our own on-ramp function if we're able to reach there. Okay, good. So we understand the right way to do password validations. What happens if the user doesn't already exist in the database? You sign them up. You store them in the database. So you do a db.user.create, and you put their phone number as well as their hashed password in the database. I repeat, you put their hashed password. You do not put their raw password in there. And then also you say you are signed up, good to go. Ideally, what should you do? Send an email to the user here and then do email validation. Right now, anyone can hijack any phone number, or in this case, phone number. You should send a phone OTP to the user's phone number. You should send an OTP to the user's phone number because, right now anyone can hijack numbers like these, even though they don't own the phone number, but we're not getting there yet. All right, great. Authentication is done, Harkirat. Anything else that's present in this application? No. It was a basic application that has authentication setup. If you look at page.tsx, I use the use session hook that comes from nextauth/react. If you have gone through nextauth, this should be straightforward. Another endpoint that I've just exposed for now, so you can try it out, is API/user/route.ts, which is an API route that shows you whether or not the user is logged in. So if you look at the logic, it says export a get function, which gets the current session from nextauth, which means is the person logged in. If I try to hit a backend endpoint 3001/API/user, this is a backend endpoint, does not return HTML, returns JSON. The logic here, what does it say? Get the server session, which means the person that is logged in, give me their details. And if they are logged in, return the user details directly to the front end. So the ID is 3, email is 123456. Ideally, this should be phone number, but you get the idea. And then if the user is not logged in, you get back a status 403. So if I go to the front end and log out, and then go here again, it gives me a 500 status code, surprisingly. Probably this call fails, so I should wrap this inside a try catch. Okay, if the get server session call fails, you should return something cleaner. Let me do that really quickly. You don't have to, but something like this. If get server session fails, means the user isn't logged in. I would have not expected it to fail. But yeah, you can return this here. Now if I refresh, you'll see it says you are not logged in. But if I go back here and log in, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 1 2 3 1 2 3, and I go here, it says you are logged in. So both on the back end and on the front end, if I go to page.tsx here, I have the details of the user. So authentication works. If I want, I can also render the name or email of the user here on the app bar. I have those details on the front end. Given this bootstrapped application, how do you add on ramping to it is the next question. The next question is, given this Paytm application's landing page, you need to give the user a UI that looks something like this. Let me show you what we're building, or at least trying to build today. We're trying to build this thing right here. Just 1 second. A page that looks like this. This is what we're trying to build. A page where user can select their bank account and click on a pay now button, reach the bank account server, and whenever they do the payment, the bank account server should tell our backend कि हाँ भाई, the person has paid, so we can increase the wallet balance of the user. I repeat, what are we building? What do we want on this landing page now? Ideally, we want this sidebar and everything, but assume the landing page, the first page that the user sees, is this transfer page. So we need to support a net banking option here. Allow the user to select HDFC Bank, click on submit, send the user to a dummy HDFC Bank page, and assume that the payment succeeds, and then create the webhook server. What we really want to build is the webhook server. If this is all the things that we're building, we have a next application, which is front end and back end for the user. We have another next application for the merchant, even though we're not exploring it today. We have two next applications. Now the thing that we have to build is an express application, a pure backend express application. Express app that who will hit? The HDFC servers will hit. Now, given we don't have banking APIs, so we will have to mock out HDFC Bank as well. But that really depends on us how much we want to mock it out. We can get there. The goal to build is express app so that whenever HDFC Bank tells us कि भाई ID1 has given 2000 rupees, And HDFC Bank also tells us, I have sent this money over to you. Your Kotak Bank now has plus 2,000 rupees. Then us as Paytm need to go to the database and tell the database, okay, bro, plus 2,000 for this user, and add a transaction. So we also have to create some more database schemas. Right now the database is very plain, but those are the things we have to do. Do we understand what we are building next? This express application that HDFC Bank will hit. We are writing the backend first, then we will write the front end that looks something like, where did it go? This, the front end that looks like this. Let me do a quick poll, and if everyone's good, I can recap the architecture of this specific part a bit, and then we can go from there. All right, we understand what we're building. If you remember the original architecture from yesterday, it was the same. The next application user, next application merchant, and then bank webhook handler. I said the bank webhook handler that banking APIs will hit. So this is what we are building right now. If we are able to build this, it means we have built next app front end, build this as well. Of course, not working right now, but at least build the Postgres database. Only withdrawals we haven't built, which is a challenge in itself. If the user asks to send their money back to their bank, but we'll get this here either in an offline video or next week. Let's build the bank webhook handler. I would urge you to come to Paytm 17-14. The last slide right now, at least more slides will get added here, but the last slide called on ramping on projects.100xdevs.com. This has two parts: creating a dummy bank server and creating a bank webhook handler Node.js project. You don't have to do this if you were actually connected to HDFC Bank. Since we are not, we will have to create this dummy bank server. If you ever think of doing a startup and building something like Razorpay, even this is an internal story I've heard, could be wrong. Even the folks at Razorpay built their complete stack before raising funds by creating a dummy bank server and showed the investors, okay, dekho, we have a dummy bank server through which everything works. All we need is 25 crore in the bank, because if you want banking APIs, you need to have 25 CR in a bank account. And then they reached out to investors, got the 25 CR, and then just replace this dummy server with HDFC Bank. So creating this dummy server is something you should generally do, because when you're testing it locally, whenever you're running automated tests, you need someone to hit your bank, your webhook servers, and you can't ask netbanking.com or hdfcbank.com to do it. When you're running automated tests, you will probably have a dummy server that will, fake being HDFC Bank. So it's not the worst idea to build this as well. Do you need it after you actually connect to HDFC Bank? No. Before that, yes. Because today none of us is connecting to HDFC Bank. So we will have to create this. But before we create this, we will create the bank webhook handler. This is the easy thing, creating the webhook handler that the dummy bank server will hit. So if you get the idea, you as Paytm only have to build this webhook handler. And I repeat, you only have to build this express app that HDFC Bank will hit. And whenever the user is on your website, the user is, let's say, on, this website right here, you need to show them a button. If I select your bank, is it netbanking.hdfc, is it something else? When they click on submit, you need to redirect them to netbanking.hdfcbank.com. You don't have to write any of the dummy logic. So the thing that you have to write is fairly easy and small, basically, as long as you're connected to a bank. So let's write this thing first. Let's create the bank webhook handler, which is this express app right here. The first thing you have to do there is create an express application in a turbo repo. How do you create a third application? We already have two applications here, merchant app, user app. I will just create a third application called bank-webhook. Just create a new folder called bank/webhook, and then open them side by side. Just bootstrap the application over there, which means cd cd bank-webhook, and then npm init-y to initialize package.json, npx tsc-init to initialize tsconfig.json. All the steps are mentioned here as well. Make sure you're in the apps folder in which you're creating this bank's webhook handler. And then install some dependencies. Since our webhook server is just going to be an Express server, we just need to install Express at type/Express and ESBuild, which if you remember, whenever you're doing Node.js applications in a monorepo, you need ESBuild or TSUp, one of these two bundlers. I've done all the steps from here to here, hoping it's straightforward and I can proceed, but we'll still wait for 15 seconds before I proceed. All right. The next thing you have to do is, you don't have to do this, but it's always a good idea. Okay, the tsconfig.json that was created here, just extend the base tsconfig that we have, which is, this thing right here, rather than writing your whole very long tsconfig. Just extend it from @repo/typescript-config/base.json, which is this thing right here, at repo/tsconfig/base.json. Given we have done this, then let's move on to the third step, which is create the index.ts file. Create the webhook handler that these guys will hit. So source/index.ts, then write a bunch of Express code over here. Const app equal to express app.post some endpoint. This is the endpoint that HDFC Bank will hit whenever my user pays HDFC Bank some money, and HDFC Bank transfers that money over to my bank and tells me, okay bro, transfer is done, please put 1,000 rupees in their wallet balance. You can also copy them from here. I've written a very basic dummy endpoint /HDFC Bank. You'll see a bunch of type errors. The reason for that is I have not installed the dependencies. So let me do that. Make sure you're in the bank webhook folder and you run npm install express at type/express and ESBuild. Now the type errors should go away. And now comes the question of what exactly happens. Let's say netbanking.hdfcbank.com says, okay, bro, here is a token. We'll come to what this token is. Here is the user ID of your database user ID of the person. And here is the amount that you need to credit to this person. This specific person has paid this much amount on netbanking.hdfcbank.com. What do you have to do from here? You need to update the user's balance. You need to add a plus amount to their balance. So before we even do that, we need to update our schema. Our schema now needs to support a balances table and one on ramp transactions table. The balances table is the very simple table that we should have just initially added. We added this in the original Paytm project as well, which will store, if you look at the balances table, okay, by this user ID has this much amount in their current wallet. I've added something called logged over here, which we will get to when we reach withdrawals, but ignore logged amount for now. Just the current amount, the user ID, and the relationship. Okay, bhai, this specific balance is for this specific user is what's the schema of the balances table. This is fairly easy to do. The only thing other thing we should do is, okay, whenever the user signs up, we should put an entry in the balances table with a balance equal to 0. So, the user has at least one entry in the balances table, not at least, only one entry. As you can see, the user ID is unique. So every user should have an entry over here. So whenever the user signs up, we should put a balances entry for that user. We haven't for now, it's fine. The second thing that I asked you to add was on-ramp transactions. If you look at the original designs, or generally also when you are on, Paytm or any other payment application, you will very aggressively look at, not aggressively, once in a while you will look at all your transactions. Okay, bhai, plus 2,000 rupees added. This is abhi pending, or this is done. Minus sent 2,000 rupees to Swiggy. You need a list of all of your transactions somewhere. So it's not as easy as ke balance बढ़ा दिया. It's not as easy as just increasing the balance of the user. We need to also store a list of all of their on-ramp transactions. In the future, we'll also add another table called off-ramp transactions, where they will send the money out to the bank. And maybe a third one called, user transactions, where they're just spending money through to merchants, or merchant transactions, something like that. For now, I've just added this on-ramp transactions. What all details does this need to have? Okay, bhai, what is the status? Has this been initiated? Has this failed? Has this succeeded? Things like these. Because even if you have a failed transaction, it would be nice to see it over here, right? Even if you have a failed transaction, it would be nice if you see that failed transaction in this list of transactions that you have. I would like to see you tried to pay 2000, but this request failed. Let's say you reached netbanking.hdfcbank.com and put a wrong password over there. So we will store the status as well. And what is the status? The type of the status is on-ramp status. This is something new. What is on-ramp status? And the answer is, it is an enum. It is an enum. And what are enums? We have discussed enums in TypeScript. So it's just various types that you support. We support 3 types of on-ramp transaction. This can either be success, or be failure, or be processing. It cannot be anything else. Harkiyat, why can I not just put string over here? Why on-ramp transactions? It restricts what you can put, right? It's a good idea. What if the database gets, some random string over here, Harkirat Singh, or some name over here? You don't want that. You want to restrict. Okay, bhai, status will be either of these 3 things. Whenever the person comes to the website and clicks on the button, you should make a database entry. Okay, bhai, on-ramp transaction has been started with the status pending. And then whenever the webhook gets hit, you should update this status to either success or failure. That is what status over here means. Token, I'll come to very soon. Provider, HDFC Bank, different bank, card, UPI, all of these are on-ramp transactions, right? Even if a user pays via UPI or card, they've on-ramped. So, the type of this thing that you're supporting. Harkiyat, why is this not an enum? This is not an enum because this changes very dynamically. So you don't want to, keep updating the database schema. You can create a new table here called providers, and then, say providers of type providers, but let's not go there. Let's keep it simple string for now. Amount, how much amount was on-ramped or off-ramped? In this case, on-ramped. When was this initiated? The user ID of the person and the relationship. That is what on-ramp transactions means. Where is this entry inserted? This entry is inserted when you are on this page and click on the button called I want to pay via net banking. When is this updated? This is updated to success or failure whenever HDFC Bank hits your Express server. Harkirat, what if HDFC Bank never hits my Express server? What if they forget? Then this transaction will be stuck in pending, right? Happens on Google Pay from time to time. Your transaction is stuck in pending for 2 hours. Eventually someone will look at it. Or you can be like, if nothing came from HDFC Bank for 2 hours, means it has failed. So you can add some checks over there based on that. Harkiyat, what if the Express server is down? They are sending it to us, but our backend server is down. HDFC Bank will keep retrying, hopefully, if they have written systems the right way, which most companies have. If the first request fails with some bad status code, it will retry after some time. Then if it fails again, it will retry after 1 hour. So even if your webhook server goes down, as long as it comes back up, transaction will be eventually processed. Cool. Yeah, that's it for the schema. If you understood the schema, then we can proceed. So let me do a quick poll. Was the schema straightforward? Okay, good. Okay. 81%. Let me finish it and then I'll take doubts if you did not understand this part. I think we'll finish in the next 10-15 minutes because the actual code is fairly straightforward to write. So let me quickly look at Q&A if there's anything specific. Why don't we include this thing from Nextdoor/React directly in the app bar component, since we'll be easily able to we do not include. Great question. Someone asked, I'll come to this later, but they asked, why have you taken this as inputs? Why don't we import it directly from Nextauth over here? And the answer is, that is true if app bar is only used by people that are using Nextauth. But in the future, you might have a third front end that does not use Nextauth, but uses Firebase auth. You try to keep the UI components extremely generic. Okay, bhai, whatever happens on a button click can be passed in. You try, and the other reason for this is that a lot of these are written by UI designers or UI developers who don't want to get into the application logic. They're like, bro, we are good at creating pretty components. So they create pretty components and, delegate everything to arguments. That's why. Cool. Let's finish the thing and then I'll take more doubts like these. It's a good question though. Index.ts. What do you think should happen whenever the request comes here? I need to update the database. I need to import DB from @prisma @repo/db/client. If you're doing this, make sure you add @repo/db to package.json as well. Dependencies star @repo/db : to dependencies. Even if you don't add it, it will work because we are using this in other apps as well. But a good idea to always keep your package.json up to date. If this guy is using this dependency, add it to the dependency section over here. Import DB from @db repo/db/client, and we can do a db.user balance. Sorry, as you can see, it is not showing me balance. It is showing me user. It is not showing me balance. Can you guess why? Because I have not updated schema.prisma. I just showed it to you. I never updated it. So let me go over here and copy the updated schema, which has the original details as well, the user and the merchant, but also has, on-ramp transactions and balances. So let me paste this over here to schema.prisma. And now what is the next step when you update your schema? It is migrating your database and regenerating the client. So go to packages/db, npx prisma migrate dev, give it a name if you want, call it added balances and on ramp. You don't have to give it a name. Generally a good idea to do though. What is the command I'm running? I'm going to the DB folder, the packages/db folder, after I've added all the on-ramp transaction and balances and migrating my database. I'm also regenerating the client by running npx prisma generate. So what are the two commands I ran? This and this. In which folder? In the DB folder. How can I confirm that my database has migrated? I can run npx prisma studio, and if you look at it, along with the balance, along with the users and merchants table, I now have the balances table and the on-ramp transactions table. Balances doesn't have anything, which is bad. We should, if there are 3 users, there should be 3 balances entry with 0 balance, but we can add that very soon. All right, what did I do? Migrated my database. Now if I go to index.ts, it will show me db.balances.update where user ID equal to this user ID. Set the data to be balance amount, increment by how much, payment information dot amount. So this is what I've done right now. One more thing, as I told you before, you should do is check if this request actually came from HDFC Bank. Use a webhook secret here. I'll probably add this eventually when we do like the whole thing again. All right. db.balance.update where the user ID of the user is this. Increase the amount by this much. Harkirat, why did you not do first get? You could have also done this, Harkirat. db.balance.find the user where the user ID is user ID or whatever, payment information. Dot user ID. And then why did you not do db.balance or dot update const balance equal to this, and then set it to balance plus payment request dot amount. Can we do this? Is there anything wrong in this approach that I've written over here? db.balance.update where user ID is this amount, set the amount to this, don't increment it, set the amount to balance plus payment information dot amount. Is this approach good Or was the earlier approach of incrementing good? Why can we not do this? Why should we not do this? Two requests, exactly. Time taking twice, two requests. Yeah, if two requests come at the same time, then the balance from the database would be, let's say, 0. And then the first one will set it to 0 plus 200. Second one will send it to 0 plus 400. So the user should have had 600 rupees, but the user will only have 400 rupees because we will update the balance to 0 plus something twice. If two requests come parallelly very quickly, the balance that you get from the database will be 0 in both of them. And then you'll do a 0 plus 200 update. Then you'll do a 0 plus 400 update. The balance would become 400, even though the balance should be 600. Versus if you use increment, then, even if they come parallelly, the database will be like, okay, I will first increment by 200, then increment by 400, even if they're together. And the database will handle, whatever, too many requests coming at the same time. All right. That is how you update the balance. But what is the other thing you have to do? The other thing you have to do is on-ramp transactions dot update, where user ID, or no, not user ID, where the token, I forgot to tell what the token is. I'll share what the token is very soon, but the token is how you identify an on-ramp transaction. So whenever you're creating this on-ramp transaction from this UI, you will first put this entry in your on-ramp transactions table. You'll store the token there. Eventually, when HDFC Bank tells you, they'll send the token along. Then that's how you can identify that specific, on-ramp transaction. Token, data, and then, status, success. This is all you had to do. Of course, await them. This is not all you have to do. There's one more thing you have to add here, but we're pretty close. This was how the code was supposed to look. But there is still a small problem here, which is what happens if, the control reaches here, let's say, but the request fails. So one more thing you have to do is rest.json. You probably have to do this. You have to tell if you do this, you tell the HDFC Bank server, okay, bro, status 200 is I have been able to process the request. I have captured the request. This is super important. If you don't do this, or if you send a bad status code to them, you send status code 411, then HDFC Bank will feel like, they were not able to capture this request, and they will refund the money to the user. I repeat, if you send back a 411, HDFC Bank will refund that 2,000 rupees to the user, because you told them कि भाई कुछ पंगा हो गया हमारे side, there is some problem on our side, we are not updating the user, please refund the money back to the user. So you have to be very careful with the status code you return. If you return a 400 status code, HDFC Bank will refund the money in 2 days. If you return a 200 status code, I was able to capture the request, which means I have made the change on my side, is when netbanking.hdfcbank.com will be like, okay, cool, I will not refund anymore. So yeah, this is super important, but there's one more problem here. The problem is, what if the request reaches here? This update query happens, you updated the balance of the user, and then the database went down. I repeat, this happened, database went down. This entry never reached the database. Then what will you return to netbanking.hdfcbank.com? You will return to netbanking.hdfcbank.com a bad status code. You will be like 500 status code, server went down over here. They will refund the money, but you still made an entry in your database. Or the second bad thing that can happen is you updated them here, but you did not put the on-ramp transaction. So this never reached the status code. So status code success. So you should basically send them together, which we've done in the past using transactions. You want either both of them happen and then you tell HDFC Bank good to go, or you want none of them happen. You don't want one of them happen and the other does not. So the thing that you have to do is create a transaction, which, the way to do that is this. In Prisma, we have done the same thing in Mongo and Mongoose when we were doing Paytm before. That was for a different type of transaction. We will get there eventually. That was for when you're increasing the balance of one person and decreasing the balance for other user. This is something else. This is, okay, you want a balance update and on-ramp transaction update happens together. If either one of them fails, then you tell Paytm, okay, bro, I have not increased the balance. I have not added a transaction success. Please refund the money. The status code means that. And then probably I would, in the catch, update the status to failure. In the catch, I would update the status to failure. This thing has failed. Money will be refunded to you in 2 days. That's a high level, guys. We can dive deeper if needed, but let's do a poll and understand. Do we understand the webhook handler that will actually update the user's balances? There is some more code we have to write for it to actually work. Yeah, okay, cool. 84% is good. Cool. Opening that's the end of the slide. I added a call out here, which seems like it's not needed. When I was trying this locally, .update was giving me a red squiggly. It's not anymore. So I can just remove this. So feel free to ignore this call out. And with that, let's open it for Q&A, guys. I'm looking at Q&A. So you say that app bar in front end part could be with Nextauth or Firebase, then wouldn't be hard to determine the type for Nextauth or Firebase in app bar. So you say that app bar in the front end, no. So let's say you add a third front end in the future. Currently, I have, let's say 2 websites, app.100xdev.com and projects.100xdev.com. This website uses Firebase. It actually does use Firebase. If you log in over here and click on login with Google, it will take you to a Firebase page. As you can see, it says leadcode.firebaseapp.com. So it takes you to a Firebase page, and this has something else. Now, if I want to share the app bar in both the projects, and let's say both projects are part of a monorepo, and if I want to share the app bar, then the app bar code cannot use Nextauth here, right? This uses Firebase auth, which is why it is a good idea. Okay, whenever you're writing UI components, they need to be highly generic so that, app bar can be used by 2 different authentication mechanisms, not just Nextauth. Can you repeat on ramp transactions? Yeah. So if you want the user to finally see this in their UI, if you want the user to finally see these, okay, bhai, you added 2,000 rupees from HDFC Bank, you added 3,000 rupees from this, and the status of this is, let's say, 200 rupees over here, and status is success or status is failure, things like these. If you want the user to see all of these, you need to store them on your site. Whenever a request is initiated, we haven't written that code yet. We haven't written the front end where you come here, click on a button, and a transaction gets added that says pending over here. Whenever we write that code is when you will see we create an actual entry in the on-ramps table so that we can eventually show the users all of their transactions. That is what the on-ramp table is supposed to do. This one right here. Sorry, not this one. This one right here. Cool. Sorry. I'm sorry, guys. The Q&A gets a little low. Let's just do it in chat. So I'm going to open chat so I can just take a lot of questions, then pause, and then we can go from there. All right, and feel free to drop off if you understand everything. That's all for today. Thank you, guys. Okay, I'll start from the top. I'm asking about app bar 2. How can type be generic work if both Nextauth and Firebase? How can the type be generic? What is that? Oh, okay. Well, if I go to appbar.tsx, I can be like, yeah, I have to render what over here? Either log out or log in based on whether or not the user exists. So I can just be like, yeah, give me one input is authenticated, which is a Boolean. I can be like, is authenticated is the only thing that app bar needs to accept. And if the user is authenticated, then you call on sign out or else on sign in. If the user is authenticated, you show log out, else log in. And wherever you're calling app bar, there you can write the authentication library specific logic. KR is authenticated equal to firebase.user or session.user based on whoever is rendering the app bar component. So for that reason, you can create this to be as generic as you want. Harkirat, what if I want to render the name if the user is logged in? You can accept name as an argument, right? Name, which is a string. And based on whether or not this name is being passed by, Firebase or this thing, it can be firebase user.name, or it can be, name equal to session.name if you're using Nextauth. So that is how you generify components. The bigger reason for this is if you want a lot of, external contributors to create your UI. If you want UI is created to be extremely generic, can be used by a lot of people, and being written by dumb people we don't want them to understand any application logic. We want our application logic we will write. You just write UI. You just write HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Don't worry about what happens when the button is clicked. Then you can generify your components like this. They're very generic, which means anyone can use it irrespective of, whether you're using Firebase or not. In sign in, we first have to sign up the user, right? How are we doing that? How we are doing that, since we need to check if the user exists, and we can do that if the user signed up first. Yeah, if you look at auth.tsx, what do I do there? You don't have to do this. You can have a separate sign up page where the user goes and sign up. You can create your own sign up page where user comes and you put that entry in the database. But what we are doing is, when the user is on the sign in page, doesn't matter if they're on the sign up or the sign in page. Whenever the user is on the sign in page, this isn't working. We say whenever the user is on the sign in page, if the entry that they've put does not exist in the database, sign them up. If it does exist in the database, then sign them in. If you look at the logic, what does it say? It says const existing user equal to this. If existing user, then to log them in. If existing user doesn't exist, this should, you can write an else over here. You don't necessarily. I return null there, which means nothing happens. But chalo, if I add an else over here, if the user is not already present in the database, then you sign them up. You put them in the database. So I've just written it in the same place. This is a bad idea because you eventually need to send them an OTP. So you will never be able to log them in. When a user signs up, they don't immediately ever log in. You send them an OTP, you send them something else, and then eventually where they put that OTP or click on an email verification link is when they log in. So that's why it's not a good idea to sign up and sign in together. But since we're not doing any email verification, I did it. Hopefully that answers it. Guide me regarding this error. Let's see. Explain the last slide one more time. Okay, I will explain it again. Where say everything from the top. We'll do the Paytm project basically again. In small chunkable modules. But I'm still happy to do it in a while. My throat. I don't see anything. Akash. Guide me regarding this error. Okay. Okay. Red swirly. Let me know if I can add repo to client. Did you add repo / yeah? So I also see this from time to time. It will still work. You might notice it is still working. But you still see the type error. Someone posted a solution to this. Is that someone already on chat? I also saw this in a random module and I put this as a to-do yesterday. Did you post the solution? I don't think it's an export issue. Even with an export, a lot of times this happens. What is the ideal way to create a salt? Yeah, you should just, when the user is signing up, I'm sure there's a library that lets you do it. Yeah, you can try adding repo / db to package.json. You can ensure that it's in exports. You might still see it. I also saw it for a module yesterday. Wasn't able to debug it. So I created a bounty out of it yesterday. If you go, if you go to projects.handexdevs.com and go to the Paytm project, you will see I was also seeing this error over. Let's see. On what slide? Yeah, I also saw the same error on slide number 10 over here. So if someone has fixed this, let me know how. Yeah, I did everything right. I added repo / store everywhere in package.jsons, exporting the right thing on there. So if you follow all the steps and if you still see the red squiggly and if you're able to fix it, tag me on Discord and that'll be the fix over here. If you're seeing this error, confirm. Oh, well, as you can see, it says clearly, right? Invalid prisma.user.find first allocation, error validating data source. So your it's probably not able to connect your database. So number one, go to db/.env and make sure you have the right database URL. And if you do have the right database URL, regenerate client. Go to DB and regenerate the client. So you'll basically try to debug the error. Basically, your authorize function is throwing an error. So debug why that error is coming. That's a solution right there. All right. Opening chat one more time. Not opening it, just looking at it. Let's consider we're creating a password manager app. After saving the hashed password in the database, how do you get back password in unhashed version. I don't know how password managers work. You store some version of the user's password. In that case, you can create algorithms that prove. If you're creating a password manager, basically the dumbest way is you store their password in plain text. Probably not a good idea. A better way is you encrypt them somehow, and then whenever the user wants their password, you decrypt them. In this case, one password can have access to your password. I repeat, if you're using a password manager that is able to return you your password, most probably if there is a hack in their specific password manager website, then someone will be able to steal the plain text passwords. But I'm sure whoever is building this has sort of thought of an algorithm, a provable algorithm, has deployed an algorithm that shows you that they can never get back the original password, but you can if you have using some client side secret that you might have. So yeah, password managers are a slightly different use case where you need to return the user the plain text password. Ideal way to generate a salt. It's not a number, it's usually a string only. Sure, there's a library in generate there you go, bcrypt.gensalt. This probably means the length of the hash. That makes a lot of sense. Cool. Why are you not creating a pending entry? Yeah, I'm not creating a pending entry first because we haven't written that logic yet. We haven't written the logic or the API endpoint that gets hit when the user is on the landing page and clicks on the HDFC Bank button. So when we do that is when we'll create the entry. We haven't done that yet. We've just created the update. All right. Okay. Seems like I'm going to be very sick, guys. So let's just do one more set here. Then I'll call it. App bar lines is you're saying the sign in and sign in endpoints. Yes. So yes, you are right, sir. Sign in exactly. You cannot. Yeah, you're right. You cannot do it. These need to be you can do this. Whatever the sign up type Firebase or sign up type next talk, something like that. You can do that, right? Can we add Zod validation in the Nextauth login page? Yes, you can. Zod is just a library. You can totally go here and do in fact I've written a to do over here. Okay, add Zod validation. You can do a user input.verify. It might just happen that Nextauth does it for you, and the control never reaches here if the credentials are wrong. I could be wrong, but even if that's possible, you can just do a Zod.verify over here. All right, one more Notion doc. I'll have to call it here, guys. बड़े दिनों बाद बीमार हुआ मैं. Oh, this is a npm and dev पे turbo dev. So if I was you, I would first try to go to. This is an error when you run turbo dev. What you can do is you don't have to run them together, and this is probably because you're on Windows. You can just go to the user app folder and run npm run dev. If you do that, then turbo is not running, so you should be fine. I think it'll work for you if you do that. Yeah. All right. What else? There you go. This is some person did it. So what was the exact change? Let's see. What did I miss? /balance. Oh. Okay, we might be doing the same thing. $50 bounty. $50 bounty to Soumitra Saha. And it seems like you have to write a .ts. And this is what I had written that gave me the error. These are the most. How did you debug this, Soumitra? Have you written? Can you just add that detail here? I would love to know. Because I spent at least 20 minutes doing it, and I was like, okay, someone will figure it out. But it seems like you have to. This might be what you might be doing wrong as well. Aditya, you asked the question. Just add a .ts at the end, and that should fix it. All right. Let me see if I missed something. Please upload remaining part of yesterday's recording. Oh, you want that? Okay, I have it. I can upload it in the ad hoc section or someplace because we want, let's not confuse everyone. All right, guys, I'll have to call it. I'll hopefully see you guys next week if I'm better by then. If not, let's see if we take a break. But yeah, I will have to call it. If there are more questions, tag me. I can Discord. I can type it out or I can speak. I think I'm done. Cool, guys. Inspect window. Oh, that's because they've blocked it. Harkirat.class account. Javed. Yeah, it's a security measure from their side. It's not any beneficial at all. But yeah, cool guys. Let's call it. See you guys tomorrow. Next week. Bye bye.